Introduction. The role I never chose growing up. It seemed like my role in life had already been decided for me before I even had a chance to understand it. My family had created a story in which I was never meant to be the main character. That role was reserved for my sister, Claire. Claire, with her perfect blonde hair, effortless charm, and grace that seemed to enchant everyone around her. She was the family's golden child, the one who could do no wrong, while I was the other one, the shadow. From the moment I could walk, I knew something wasn't quite right. I wasn't like Claire, and my family made sure I knew it. Maybe it was in the way my mother would always glance at me with a slight frown whenever I stood next to Claire in photos. Or maybe it was the way my father barely looked at me when he talked about how lucky we were to have someone as stunning as Claire in the family. He never used that word with me. Lucky, special, beautiful. Those were Claire's words. As a child, I didn't have the language to understand what was happening to me. I only knew how it felt, like I was missing some invisible quality that made people love you. It wasn't just my family that reinforced this belief. It was everyone, teachers, neighbors, kids at school. They would fawn over Claire and then look at me as though I were something incomplete, something broken. No one said it outright, but it was clear. Claire was the one who had a future, a path laid out for her. I was just there. I existed in the background, never the one anyone wanted to focus on. My entire existence felt like an unspoken question. Why can't you be more like her? Part 1. The pain of growing up ugly as we got older. The differences between Claire and me only became more pronounced. Puberty hit her like a gift from the heavens. She became even more stunning, if that was possible. Her hair shimmered, her skin glowed, and boys began to notice. It was as if she had stepped into the role of the protagonist in a fairy tale, and everyone around her was enchanted. Meanwhile, I seemed to stumble my way through those awkward teenage years. My hair never did what I wanted it to. My skin broke out constantly, and my body didn't develop the way the other girls did. It felt like I was living in someone else's body, one that didn't fit me. And worse than that, I felt like I was living someone else's life, a life where everything I wanted seemed out of reach. I don't know if there's a single word that could describe how I felt about my sister during that time. Jealousy wasn't quite right, because it wasn't just that I wanted to be like her. I wanted to be seen, to be noticed for something other than my failures. And the problem was that I never could be. How could I compete with someone like Claire? Our family made sure to remind me of the answer. I couldn't. There was no competing. No amount of effort I could put into my appearance or my grades or my personality that could make me catch up to Claire. If I ever did something well, my accomplishments were overshadowed by whatever Claire had done that day. I wasn't as smart as her, not as pretty, not as good at making friends, and in my parents' eyes, that meant I was a disappointment. But Claire wasn't just a favorite because she was pretty. She also knew how to play the part. She was charming, warm, and always seemed to say the right things. She excelled in everything that mattered. Academics, sports, popularity. Teachers adored her. Friends admired her. Boys worshipped her. And me? I was the awkward sister who never quite found her place. It wasn't just at home, either. At school, people treated me like Claire's shadow. I overheard the whispers more times than I could count. How are they sisters? Claire's so beautiful. What happened to her? She's not even that smart. How is she related to Claire? I think that's what hurt the most. The fact that people couldn't see me as my own person. I wasn't Lisa. I was just Claire's ugly sister. I couldn't shake that label, no matter how hard I tried. Part 2. The comparisons that never ended. What made it worse was the way my family treated the whole situation. My parents, especially my mother, couldn't seem to help themselves. Every holiday, every family gathering, there was always some comment, some comparison that reminded me of my place in the hierarchy. At Christmas, it was Claire getting showered with gifts while I unwrapped a single pair of socks. On birthdays, it was Claire's party that got all the attention. Even when it wasn't her birthday, my mother would tell relatives about all of Claire's accomplishments. While I stood there, waiting for someone to notice me, I could have been invisible, for all the difference it made. The hardest part was the subtlety. No one ever outright told me I was ugly. No one said, "You're not as good as your sister." But it was in the looks they gave. in the way their voices softened when they talked about me. It was in the disappointment that flashed across their faces when they realized I wasn't going to turn out like Claire. I became acutely aware of how my family saw me. I wasn't the daughter they could show off, the one they could boast about to their friends. I wasn't the one who brought pride to the family. That was Claire. Always Claire. For years, I internalized those feelings. I accepted my role as the lesser one, the daughter who didn't quite live up to expectations. I stopped trying. I stopped caring. Why bother when nothing I did could measure up to Claire's effortless perfection? But no matter how much I pretended not to care, it still stung. Every time someone praised Claire, every time they compared us, I felt that old familiar pain creeping up my throat. I wanted to scream at them, to make them see that I was worth something, too. But I never did. I just swallowed the hurt, tucked it away, and kept living in the shadow. Part 3. Breaking away. The turning point came after high school. Claire, predictably, got into the prestigious college she had always wanted. She left home with fanfare, the family throwing a huge going-away party in her honor. On the other hand, quietly enrolled in a local community college. No party, no celebration, just me, packing my things into my old, beat-up car and driving myself to the small apartment I had rented. It was during those years that I began to distance myself from my family. I didn't stop talking to them altogether, but I stopped seeking their approval. For the first time in my life, I realized I didn't need to live under Claire's shadow. I didn't need to be compared to her. I could be my own person, even if no one else saw it yet. College wasn't easy for me. I worked part-time jobs to pay for my tuition and rent, often staying up late into the night to finish assignments. But it was during those long, lonely nights that I discovered something important. I was stronger than I had ever given myself credit for. I didn't have the luxury of Claire's easy life, but I had something else: resilience. Slowly, I began to focus on my own growth. I worked on myself in ways I hadn't before. I started exercising, taking care of my health, and building up my self-esteem. It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight. But I was determined to become the person I had always wanted to be. It was during this time that I met David. He was different from anyone I had known before. Kind, intelligent, successful. But most importantly, he saw me. Not the awkward girl who had been bullied her whole life. Not the ugly sister living in the shadow of someone else's beauty. He saw me. We met through work. I had taken a job as an assistant at a small firm, trying to make ends meet while finishing my degree. David was one of the senior partners, someone everyone looked up to. But unlike so many others, he didn't look down on me. He treated me like an equal, something I wasn't used to. At first, I didn't believe it. I couldn't understand why someone like David would be interested in someone like me. But as we spent more time together, I began to realize that he wasn't seeing the flaws I had spent my life obsessing over. He saw my intelligence, my humor, my strength. He saw the things my family had always overlooked. Part 4. The engagement. David and I grew closer over the next couple of years. Our relationship wasn't rushed, but it was steady. He treated me with a kindness and respect I had never known before. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was enough, not because of how I looked or because of how successful I was, but because of who I was inside. When David proposed, it felt like my world had shifted. The girl who had always been told she wasn't good enough was now standing on the brink of a life she had never imagined for herself. David's love gave me the confidence I had been missing my whole life. For the first time, I felt like I had won. But, of course, my family wasn't far behind. Word spread quickly about my engagement. The news seemed to shock everyone, especially my family. My mother's phone call was almost comical in its forced enthusiasm. She tried to hide her surprise, but I could hear it in her voice. She hadn't expected me to be the one to find happiness. Not after everything. My father reached out next, asking about the wedding plans, as if we had spoken regularly over the years. It was almost laughable. The same man who had barely acknowledged my existence now wanted to play the role of the doting father. And then there was Claire. She was the last to contact me. Her message was brief and cold. a stark contrast to the warmth she had always shown in her own life celebrations. I knew it bothered her. Me getting married first. Me finding success in a way she hadn't anticipated. Claire had always been the star. And now, for the first time, she wasn't. Part 5. The final decision as the wedding approached. The tension with my family grew. My mother and father called constantly, practically begging to be invited. They wanted to be there, to share in this moment of my life that they had never been a part of. They wanted to play the role of the loving family, even though they had spent years treating me like an afterthought. Claire, too, made her feelings known. She claimed I was being unfair, holding on to old grudges that didn't matter anymore. But they did matter. The years of comparisons, the cruelty, the way they had treated me like I didn't belong. It all mattered. And now that I had finally found happiness, they wanted to act like none of it had ever happened. I had a choice to make. I could invite them, let them be part of my wedding, or I could cut them off, the way they had cut me off for so many years. In the end, the choice was simple. On the day of my wedding, I walked down the aisle with my best friend by my side. David stood at the altar, waiting for me with a smile that made my heart swell. The people who had truly loved me were there. The friends I had made along the way. The ones who had seen my worth when my family hadn't. As for my family, they weren't there. I didn't need them anymore. I didn't need their approval, their validation. I had found my own happiness, my own success. I had built a life for myself that they had never believed I could have. And as I looked into David's eyes, I realized that I had finally stepped out of Claire's shadow. I wasn't the ugly sister anymore. I wasn't the outsider. I was me, and that was enough.